Think that the recent NA shuffle, the players moving around between teams like CLG, Cloud9, Luminosity, Neolum, what that really highlighted to me was the problems that are actually endemic, that are actually systemic within the NA scene, beyond just players, because the shortcut to getting better results is to get a team of better players together. That doesn't necessarily mean better in terms of just aim, but fit together better, do those roles better, because then you can have more talent, you're going to make up for some of the deficiencies of the team. But ultimately, that's only one approach to doing it, okay? That's one way you can make some sort of a super team and hope that it does well. It would have a chance to if it played to the best of its capabilities. But that alone isn't going to cut it, especially not for the whole NA scene. And it's not a good excuse either to be like, oh, we don't have a super team, so that's why we're not good enough. A lot of great teams in the world aren't super teams, aren't the absolute best players from their country, and yet they manage to compete and to play the effective CS. I won't say the right way in CS, because you can say that. I think there is a most effective way, but I think it's better to use terms like effective, productive, intelligent, over just saying like the right way or stupid, dumb. Because this is one of the problems I noticed when I saw people like Steel and Daze breaking down the game was, unfortunately, the way they would talk would be as if like if you did things like an ineffective way, you were dumb and you're an idiot. And yet there's actually some world-class players who sometimes do some of those things. Meanwhile, the other way that they were proposing was the right way, and this is like the intelligent way to play. The problem with that is then it's immediately going to make people think things like, well, did you always play that way? And, it's easy for you to say that. So it just gets into this whole like unnecessary area. So anyway, I'm going to go over some of the issues I see in terms of how NA teams play and the NA scene in general. And then we're going to look at some of the reasons why these problems exist. So let's just start very basically with an overview of the problems on the two different sides. So on CT side, the big problem I see on this area is, first of all, teams lacking enough raw skill across the lineup. Now, this is one of the reasons why I think a lot of these teams, when they go to international tournaments, aren't able to win matches, especially not best of three against good European teams. We're talking top 6 to 8 teams in Europe. And the reason why is lacking the appropriate kinds of skill on the CT side. Because I've always said, CT side, yes, obviously, CT side's the side where you try to use superior positioning, because often you're going to be facing multiple opponents. You're going to try and make intelligent decisions in terms of repositioning after kills or after someone in your team dies. You're going to try and use communication to do good rotations into different sites. And you're going to try and have excellent communication to kind of lubricate all of these processes and make them run as smoothly as possible and as accurately and as efficiently as possible. But ultimately, since so many times as CT, the initial engagements are taking place with less CT players against more terrorist players, you also need to have quite a lot of skill. Because especially in CSGO, where you can't do a spray down of 3 people in one tight corridor like you could in 1.6, you need to be able to get those individual kills and to be able to essentially win a bunch of 1v1 aim duels at times. And so you're going to need a lot of skill for this. This is something actually a while ago when Cloud9 came to Europe for an event, I think it was Face It, Season 2 Finals. I said to them when I was talking to them, and they were and one of them asked me like, "Oh, what do you think our problem in our team is?" Because some of them used to get mad that I always said that like nothing was a superstar or whatever. And I said, "Okay, you have some good tactics. You have a couple of maps where you're good on T side, but the reason why you don't have a home map that you can always win, and the reason why you can't actually beat most of these top European teams is because you're just not good enough on CT side. And that part of that comes down to the fact that you haven't got enough reliable skill in certain spots on the map. So you can't rely that this spot's always going to be held by this guy to a certain degree. Like I know what sort of attack would overrun him and how many people would get past him. And I know that this guy over here always takes down the first one and drops back to these. But they didn't have that kind of reliable dynamic set up. What's funny is some of the members of the team, ironically, the less skilled players didn't agree with me. And some of the more skilled players in the team were like, yeah, I think he's got a point there actually. So in general, the problem with not having enough good super team type dynamic, etc., is that, yeah, you haven't really got enough teams that CT side could go head to head with the Fnatic, Envious, Titan, these levels of team in Europe, because those lineups are very, very skilled. And if you notice, they're the gods of the CT side in general in the last sort of year or so. They're the amazing CT side teams. And part of it stems from the fact that, yes, they've got all the other aspects as well. They've got all the communication, team play, great setups, good reads from the in-game leader from when to rotate, but they've also got that raw baseline of individual skill in terms of the level, an effective individual skill. So there's one problem, but another major problem I see on the CT side is the in-game leaders in North American teams. It's hard to tell how much of it is like the individual players, so I'm going to have to just say in-game leader here, because in theory it's his responsibility ultimately. The in-game leaders in North American teams, seem to be really bad at making calls to rotate players over when they're on CT side. And what I mean by that is, let's imagine a game on which you're playing. The two best maps for this is, well, actually, I guess you could add in a third one. The two best examples is Inferno and Mirage, but now I think you could add in Cache as well, with the dynamic of how that plays. Now we're getting more T rounds now, especially because all three maps have an element of mid control. It's very important. One of the reasons why mid control is so important on these three maps is because when you play them, if you don't have any mid control, you don't have any scouting there, you're not at least holding the area so people can't go into it, then what happens is you get split between the two sites and you don't have a lot of information as to where the enemy is setting up. And on all three of these maps, once the enemy is set up to go into a specific bomb site, it's usually A on Inferno and Cache, and I'm thinking more of B on Mirage. As soon as they're set up to go in, if you don't have any information for when they go into the site, it's going to be difficult to hold, because these are the sites where they're going to be able to overrun you, and that extra man is a massive, massive difference in holding these three bomb sites. In these particular scenarios, on these three maps, ideally, you're trying to use mid control and other aspects of how you play the other sites to just gain a little bit of information. And you don't need a lot of information. It's not like you have to literally see three people sitting in like in the area leading into the A bomb site on Cache to be able to say, right, they're going to come A now, we'll rotate a guy over. No, you might only need to see one guy, or see the right flash, or see a boost happening somewhere where your in-game leader can read from that, right, I think they're setting up for this A attack that I've seen before. So either rotate a man over to A right now and have him ready there when they come in, or push a guy into B and get some information there. Is there anyone set up there? Is there more than one person? Get reads like this, and then from that, make the correct decision in terms of rotations. Now, the absolute best European teams are the best in the world at doing this. Fnatic's the prime example, isn't it? Because we always say, look at this team, you see the way that Pronax makes these calls, or the team themselves, whatever. I think their team, they have a bit more autonomy. But okay, we'll give we're going to go in-game leaders. So we'll give the ultimate credit to him. He makes these calls, and it feels like on Inferno, every time you go to A, it feels like there's four guys there. Every time you come to B, either they can hold it with two, because they were the best two-man combo in the world at B, or they'll have that third guy coming way faster than normal. So by the time you've even got the smokes down to run into the B site, that third guy's already there shooting through the smoke. So this gives you a massive competitive advantage, and this is an area where I see so many NA teams are way behind the curve on it. They're not even close. A lot of them are playing as though this was just matchmaking or lower level competitive play. And first of all, they're just sitting in their spots in the different sites. Not like they're sitting always in the default spot, but they're just all sitting in the sites that they play. And either they just push up, but not for a particular reason to get information, just because they want to try and push up and get a kill there. Maybe that works in NA. Or they're in a situation where they just sit there, and then when the enemy comes into the site, then just like a matchmaking game, they say, right, A, 3A, they're bomb A, and then the other guy rotates over. And it's always just like this. And so as a result, first of all, if you're a guy from the other team, this is ideal. You're always going into sites where there's never a gambled extra man over. And the key thing is, though, it's that you're not making a pure gamble. It's not, you're not just going randomly, right? Send one to A and have four there so we get wrecked at B. It's an informed gamble. It's a guess, but based on the incomplete information, but you've got some information and some that you can piece together. And there's implications of, what does this mean compared to this? If I see this setup, what could that lead to here? And by making these calls, you gamble and get a much better chance on CT side. That's the other problem. The times that I do see NA teams stack in a site like that or put people over, a lot of it looks more like pure gambles, as in they just decide randomly, like, okay, well, they came A a bunch last time, so we'll just put an extra guy here at the beginning. Like, that's not really the approach you're taking either, because then you are obviously open to the obvious weakness that if they go to the other side, or even worse, if they give you a very simple fake. Like, I've seen fakes work on NA teams that should not work at the highest level. Someone should not be able to fake you out into rotating an extra guy to a site off one smoke, one flash, and one guy peeking in and shooting a bit. That's not enough. That should not be enough to make you fully rotate a guy over on a map like Inferno. If it is, you're going to lose Inferno games massively, and your CT side is going to be massively hindered, and you're not going to compete with these elite level teams. These top level teams, the elite ones, Fnatic, Envious, Snip, TSM, they don't fall for very simple fakes. They can read the game in that sense. The in-game leaders, the teams, and they've got a bit more autonomy. These players themselves have kind of learned a little bit of how to be like a sub-general and make some decisions themselves that they inform into the in-game leader. But okay, put it on the in-game leader, because if the in-game leader can do a lot of this stuff, if he's getting good comms from his players and he's a smart guy, he can make some of these reads and at least give you a better chance in these scenarios. NA teams really aren't doing that. Now going on to T side, tactics on NA teams, this is a whole clusterfuck, and I could spend so much time just on tactics alone. Because first of all, almost every NA team still runs this same philosophy from day one. This literally has existed since the beginning of Counter-Strike 1.6 in NA and almost rarely ever changed. It had a little period in time during Team 3D's era and Cole's era when they were the best teams, and they really were the best team in the world very briefly in 3D's case and a bit longer for Cole, when they had a bit more execute tactics. But in general, the standard NA terrorist side play is you set up what we call a base. You just set up the initial positions that you all go to on the map, and you might have 2 or 3 variations of this. You go to those positions, and then either all of you just peek out and see what's there and kind of probe, or, which by the way, all teams do this. A lot of other teams do this as well. But the difference is in Europe, when you do that, you're doing that to get the information to then go for an execute, or just to set up and then decide what an execute is going to happen based on if the enemy probes out or something, or you just have a base that you're going to decide upon at that point in time. There's like 2 stages to it. So there's the base, and then there's the middle one, then there's the end game. In the NA case, they'll go to do the base, and they'll do this each round, different setup, but okay, same base. Do the base every time rather, and every time they get to this position, it's this: guys, look for picks. And what that means is at least 1 or 2 players, usually the good aimers, just try and take 1v1 aim duels, and then predicated on what happens in the 1v1 aim duel, that's what the rest of the round's going to go off. So if they get a kill here, right, maybe we go in there, or maybe we assume that they're going to rotate there and we go to another site. And it's all just very... What's funny is you're taking a proactive approach here at first by you taking an aim duel, but after that it's incredibly reactive, and it's actually quite simplistic play and approach. There's not very many proper tactics which are executed from these, proper executes that go beyond that. And so a lot of rounds fall apart on the T side. Even if there was a tactic, it doesn't look like it from the way you see the tactics set up and then played out. Like, it's hard to... I've been watching some of these games. It's really hard to tell what the actual tactic is. I'm watching the same setup 7 times, and I can get 6 or 7 different results each time. And I'm not just talking as in the situations are different in terms of who fought where and where the CT was. Just in terms of the way it's executed, there's not as much rhyme or reason. So it looks a lot more like these are just poggy, scrimmy strats. And so ones where you just try a weird surprise on someone, and then that's a one-off, so you know that won't work again, so you have to try something else next time. One of the key hallmarks of proper tactical execution, and you'll see this in all sports, is that a properly executed tactic can work almost every time. And what I mean by that is, even when the enemy knows it's coming, you can still execute it to a degree. Even if he has the extra man there sometimes, or even if he tried last time and so he sets up differently, the smoke's right and the flash is right and this guy's looking in the right spot, that it's so difficult to shut down. Even if he knows what he wants to do, he can't do it as well, because right now it's a very effective strategy against what he's doing, and you've read him well. This is where NA has a really bad time. Try and find me the NA team who has one map where on terrorist side, they have like 2 or 3 executes that you can guarantee could get them 8 rounds every time on that map on T side. You're not going to find them. It'd be almost impossible to find a team like this. So there's way too many pugs or scrim tactics. Those are good for one-offs. That's it. Basically, they're cheese, okay? Cheese in games, people always decry it and say, oh, it's lame. It is to a degree, but that's when people rely on cheese. You know, if you rely on cheese, you're going to be a very inconsistent guy who'll win one map, but then in other maps you won't do very well, and you'll never even have consistency even on that map. So I'm thinking of a team like CLG right now. There's a lot of they're trying a lot of this, but cheese effectively used is supposed to be, you have your baseline of here's the executes and here's the real tactics we're going to try and here's our approach to the game, and then you add in a little bit of cheese here and there to throw the enemy off and get you a couple of extra rounds. Maybe when you just need to get 2 more to win a game or something, then you have those extra little rounds in the bag you can pull out, those little wild cards, those jokers. In terms of mid-round calls, again, this leads off what I said on the CT side. The mid-round calls in NA teams seem to be so scattered. Like, when you get these teams like Fnatic and other teams, TSM, I think at the moment, when the initial part of the round happens and the initial couple of firefights happen, and both teams have repositioned into where, like, the CTs have got their defense readapted, and the terrorists regroup to decide what they're going to do. The mid-round calls here in NA teams, you can't really tell what the decision is or what the logic behind what they're going to do is. People tend to still play quite individualistically. It's like they have a very simple idea of like, right, just like hold back and just like slowly push the catwalk, and then they hope that they get a favorable aim duel there. So much of the game for NA seems to be predicated just on who, if you headshot someone or getting a fight and winning the fight. That's not the basis that tactics are based off. Tactics are supposed to be based off an ideal world, actually, where very few kills happen. In an ideal tactic, you get into a site, you kill a couple of people maybe, but you don't even have to. You can push them off the site. You can push them out of an area with flashes or smokes. You move in together so that two people together kill someone. It's not one guy who has to specifically get a kill. It's all about out-positioning people, outnumbering people, out-thinking people, out-rotating people, out-maneuvering people. This is all the qualities that tactics are based off. If your tactic is based off, you literally have to hit this headshot, then kill this guy, and then you must win a 1v1 against this guy. And later on, you might have to win a 1v2 against this. That's not a very good tactical basis, or rather, it's a very inefficient tactical basis. And if you try that in the long run, you're not going to win many rounds. And even worse than that, you're going to lose a lot of rounds because you're going to get into those situations where you that's your aim, and then you're not going to get some of those kills, especially when we then add in better players than you who have better communication, better team play, all those factors. So the mid-round calls seem very scattered, and that's why I notice a lot of the NA teams, when they're facing the top European teams, if they get those initial entry kills, if they get those first picks, then they sometimes can swarm a site, they can overtake a site, they can go in. That's all great, they can get bombs down. But those mid-round calls, when either you don't get the first pick or you get the first pick but the defense adapts correctly, those tend to go to shit. Like in the middle of the game, they might be okay, but especially late game when you have to execute and grind out rounds, that's where these teams have a huge problem, and they just revert to this. You can see it in CSGO especially. Any teams, even international teams, Fnatic sometimes occasionally does this. When Fnatic gets really late in a massive game in a semi-final, if they're on T-side and they have to grind out 2 or 3 rounds out of the last like 5, they have a real bad habit. Envious as well does this, where they just go super slow and they try to only take aim duels and walk into sites. And they're never rushing, they're never coordinated, they're never overwhelming the enemy, they've never got timings that they're hitting. They're just trying to go in and just win off getting some headshots off Olaf Meister or Shocks or JW or whoever. Now, first of all, some of those European teams can get away with that because they are the best teams in the world in terms of even just skill. But secondly, that's not even that good an approach for them. They themselves are reverting to almost this NA mode, but in the most difficult times, the most trying periods of the game. The NA teams are doing this even in lesser games, in group stage games. That's their problem, is it's the de facto approach for them, it seems. There's also a factor that execution beats out anti-stratting. Like what I said there is, if you can execute a strategy to a degree, unless it's ultra anti-stratted, as in they literally know that you're going to come on this ramp, so at the second you go to the period where you get on the ramp, the timing, 4 nades land at your feet. Unless something as extreme as that happens, even them looking at the ramp when they know that you're going to come up here might not even be enough if you execute it properly and the flash comes out here and the smoke comes out here. So in general, execution should be your number one approach in terms of T-side play. It shouldn't be trying to anti-strat people with like weird strats where, I think they play one catwalk this, we'll do this weird bizarre thing like here. In general, your approach wants to be on T-side. This is a sorely lacking thing, is not to just copy Europeans and see a good European tech and go, that's good, we'll take it and just do it. Because when you see something like that, you might not understand entirely the dynamics of why it works or what's going on there. You want to develop your own style. You want to look at what they've done there. And if you can take something from it that works for you, like, okay, here's the strengths of our team, here's what would work for us, take that part and put it into your own style and develop your own style. Because I've seen this in all games, StarCraft, League of Legends, Quake. The most effective way to play the game is not even to look at the most efficient, pure way to play the game. Like, you'd ideally have this sort of aim and you'd play this sort of a strategical game. It's to look at your own skill set and your personnel if you're in a team. And like, who else is in your team? What types of players do you have? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? And design your style specifically just for you and your team. And if you can design your style like that and you can execute it to the best of your capability, you will have a chance at least versus top teams because your style will be distinct and set fit to you. Meanwhile, first of all, some of those top teams might not exactly have a perfect style for them. They might be trying to play that efficient style and following the meta, like chasing the meta a little bit too much. I think there's always a saying I have whenever people ask me about like esports stuff, like, what can I do in esports? I always say, what you have to do is find the thing that only you can do the best. As in, if Thorin does a video or Thorin does an article, like, because it's going to be a Thorin article, Thorin video, I'm the one who can do them the best out of anyone. Someone else could do a different video that's better than mine, but it'd be in their own way, their own style. I've tried to find my style and harness it and hone it, and I've got my style down, and I continually work on it to get what works for me and what doesn't work for me, and try and make the best videos I can do. So in this sense, this is another thing NA teams need to do. Don't just become subpar European teams who are kind of fucking up the strats there and don't really understand why they're anti-stratting this guy in this particular way, or why they're trying these approaches that doesn't work for the people they have. Start out by building it based on what works for you. Okay, going beyond that, we've got to come to economy management. So money management, knowing when to eco, how to eco, what to do on ecos. There are no NA teams, even to this day. I mean, Cloud9 had a few that were like this, but they didn't really have the skill to pull them off. No NA teams have really good eco rounds where, and I'm talking about the saves where, because there's no pure ecos in CSGO anymore, but basically, the ones where you buy full Tech 9s, or you buy 2 Tech 9s, 1 AK, or you buy all the CZs. How come these weapons, we all think they're just matchmaking guns, you just buy them and anyone runs around the corner, you try and get a kill, and they're bullshit pistols, so maybe you can get a kill, right? Well, in that case, this is a great example of the problems in terms of tactics and communication within these NA teams, because where are the NA teams that are amazing at these rounds, that have all the sick full Tech 9 buys, where they can get into a site, they can get the bomb down, they can get kills, they can swarm opponents, take all their guns? Yeah, they can do it in NA, but where are these rounds happening on the international level? This is an area where it's quite deficient, because actually, even though these guns are OP as fuck, and they have huge problems, and if we argue just on the top level of the Olaf Meissen JW, I'll say, like, yeah, these guns are too powerful, they should be nerfed, they spoil the game and take away a lot of the skill. That's exactly my point. When we have good players in NA, players with skills, and these weapons are OP in this particular fashion, why aren't they able to utilize them even the same way as these top European teams are? As the way as an Envious or a Fnatic does. It's not just skill here, because remember, these guns don't require as much skill. So why aren't they able to use these weapons and overwhelm and actually use this to get back into games and to get rounds? In general, they're not. They have huge problems in this sense. And more famously, if we think of teams like Cloud9, they always used to bemoan the fact that they used to get eco'd. Yeah, well, that's part of why, because these teams had way better eco strategies than you do. And on your anti-ecos, you don't know how to play against ecos properly. Probably because, first of all, you don't play many teams who can do them well. And secondly, you don't have as good comms and all the rest of it in setups. So going beyond that, economy management is one itself, and that's a strategic one. So again, that falls on the in-game leader. He has to be doing that. And also people have to be given proper comms. I mean, I saw a round where I mentioned this at Face It, where on the last round of the game that eliminated Liquid, the in-game leader, Adren, had... And by the way, everyone keeps saying, like, Daps is the in-game leader. I've asked around, I was told it was Adren. So if you know otherwise, then Daps or Adren will have to tell me. But anyway, the in-game leader had $10,000 on the last round, and Adren had, like, a couple of thousand. And so Adren somehow... not Adren, Nitro. So Nitro somehow ends up buying a FAMAS, or getting a FAMAS drop for him, whatever, and he just had, like, a FAMAS armor and, like, 1 or 2 nades. Meanwhile, Adren had an AWP, full armor, and like 1 or 2 nades. Now in this scenario with $10,000, that's just like my read there is there's no comms have gone on there. First of all, if that's the in-game leader, he should definitely be collecting comms. Secondly, Nitro, if the player, should definitely be giving comms. I need a proper weapon. Does anyone have money to buy? That's just a massive, obvious, I'm picking this because it's an obvious flaw, where you had 10,000 and you should have been giving your best player, your star player, a proper gun, etc., before getting yourself an open full armor, and he hasn't even got full nades, etc. In fact, in that scenario, you'd be better off having 2 rifles and full nades and smokes and all the grenades, and everyone have kits and armor. So instead, this was an example of a huge fuck up, which was at the end of a game lost anyway, in the end. But this is an obvious one where there's something going on here, and ultimately it has to fall on the in-game leader. He has to be the one getting the comms, enforcing that people use comms in future, and going back over a demo like this and go, look what happened here, that can't happen again, like we made the wrong call here, or he fucked it up himself and he didn't give the information. Whatever happened there, that's a perfect example of bad money management that you don't in general see from teams like Titan, Fnatic, Envious. Now, in terms of comms themselves, I think this is a huge, huge area that's a big, big problem for these NA teams, because first and foremost, when I've heard these comms, because now I've always got to stand behind these teams, so I've heard some of this anyway, and especially going back to 1.6, it's a similar style of communicating. But when I saw some of the POV VODs from Katowice, first things first, the signal noise on these comms is fucking unreal. Like, if someone's coming into B, first and foremost, you have to call properly, right? If a couple of people come B, you don't say B, 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 like that. That's nothing. In fact, the urgency and the amount of times you're repeating that makes me assume, if I'm a person listening, that they have all gone into B as fast as possible. You don't ever do that. So first of all, don't do that. But secondly, if they are coming into B, let's say 2 are coming into B, you don't say 2B, 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 2B. That's so much of the... Think of the comms, okay, as like a bandwidth, and there's only this much space in it, and if we all talk at once, it's going to be totally jammed, and we can't get everything out of it. Like, we can't hear everyone and discern what everyone is saying at the same time. So if two people are coming to be, ideally we want totally silent comms like this. So the bandwidth is totally pure and open like this, and then you're going to say 2B, and then as he said 2B, because no one else is saying anything, that just floats through, and we all hear 2B, right? And then if something else happens, the other guy can say bomb here as well. Meanwhile, then the CTs who maybe need to quickly communicate something like, you go cat, I'll go down through spawn. The channel is clear for all of this comms to come through to every person it needs to, and everyone else, and everyone has kind of an understanding of where everyone's going to be on the map and what they're going to do. NA teams are more like B, quick, pass up here, and then someone throw the flash, and then, oh, I'm coming in now, the B, one man the box, over here. There's way too much comms like that. Signal noise in terms of like unnecessary information. Like, it's not even that people always have this thing in NA of thinking like good comms is talking all the time. No, that's bad comms. Not talking at all, like the Skadoodle type, is really bad. But once you start talking, there's a threshold at which it goes beyond that and it becomes a negative actually at that point in time. You want to talk just enough. Remember, these are your teammates. These are people who know how to play the game, ideally. If they don't, either they need to be trained or get them the fuck out of the game. And you need to train them in practice, not in a game. So you should not be having to give every single most basic matchmaking style call of everything your eyes are seeing and they're seeing and you're doing to your teammates. They should be trained enough to know. If you listen to the VODs of Nip and Fnatic, the Fnatic ones who were subtitled, if you remember, they would give very simple comms, and then you could see this level of autonomy with the players where if all of them says, right, I'm going to go do this now, then they know, like, right, he's going to do that, and then he trusts his teammate here, then understands what that means that he has to do, and how to back him up. And then their team play is intuitive. It's like, it synergizes on a level beyond basic communication. They have like a communication in terms of the way their styles of play work and how they've practiced and what they know what to do. Maybe previously discussed it next time. Oh, when I said I was going to do that, you need to do this afterwards. Like, that's all happened outside of the game. Now in the game, they just do simple comms and then they play the game out. And more importantly than that, so actually, let me think, because I have a term for that I want to use here. So the concept there is when you've been trained to do something and you only need a simple comm, and that tells not only what you're going to do, but then your opponents, your teammates know how to play off that and what to do. I call this concept macros, because like on keyboards, you could program in a macro so where you pressed one key and it did basically a whole bunch of actions, which otherwise would have required a bunch of keys and typing stuff in and entering a sequence. Instead, you make it so you press one key, and it does all that. That's what you need in comms. You need simple macros. That's what these European teams have essentially done, except they themselves wouldn't break it down like that, because the whole point is when they practice, this is the default kind of calm way they play in terms of talking, and they wouldn't know it. They'd think, oh, I just tell my teammates what to do, and we communicate well. But by practicing in this manner and learning what someone means without having to always hear them say it in the moment, maybe talking afterwards or just playing off them and seeing what happens, they've essentially programmed into each other these macros. That's also why these lineups, when they've been together for a long time, are amazing, and the ones that are just formed together don't have the same level of polish and the same level of incredible play, like that Nip Magic type shit where they can just play off each other in some incredible fashion, or Virtus Pro when they rush into a site. So you need to have these macros programmed in. As far as I can tell, almost no NA teams do. There's also the factor that once people die, they need to shut the fuck up in NA. Holy shit. When I saw some of these comms, this is as bad as matchmaking. If I'm playing matchmaking and my teammates die and I'm in a 1-on-2 and people start talking like, it's behind the wall, go around, hide, I just mute them, because I'm not going to play with someone fucking literally in my ear the whole time while I'm trying to think and play the game. At this point in time, it's now my responsibility how I play the game. And if I die, etc., now in the matchmaking, they can't choose. But if I was on a team, they either need to talk to me after the game about what I did that they think I did incorrectly, or they need to kick me out of the team if I'm incapable of playing my role. If I'm capable of playing my role, and we've had these discussions, then I have to be left in that moment to have the autonomy to play that role. Now, in matchmaking, I can understand why people do it. They don't know their teammates, etc. But I can't believe some of these NA pros do it. This is actually an area where I have to call out Steel, for example, which is that when I saw some of these videos on stream and on his channel where Steel's dead and he's watching a teammate, okay, I understand why he's doing this. He's trying to give his teammates extra calls. Like, I'm not saying his teammate's dumb, but he knows that his teammate missed a guy crossing over there, wasn't watching properly, or his teammate's looking like nervous, like, oh, he doesn't know what to do. So he's trying to give him some help, like, right, hide behind the box now, just hide, don't peek, stuff like that. But that's actually, first of all, that's really bad in terms of, like, you shouldn't be coaching this guy like that. He should know how to play the game himself. He should be learning that himself. That's very important that everyone learns these factors themselves. Secondly, it's a really bad indictment of your team if you have to act as his fucking eyes It's one thing if he didn't know there was someone catwalk, like he wasn't watching the radar or whatever, and you died there and you saw the guy on your death cam coming catwalk, you can give that information. But if he actually sees with his eyes on his screen the guy coming catwalk and he doesn't notice it himself, come on, man, think of any intelligent player. You don't sit there and not notice a guy coming on screen. That's a really bad indictment of your teammates and what you think of them. If you have to call for them what their eyes should be seeing, at the end of the day, you have to leave that to them. And if they can't do it, then they're incapable and you have to replace them and get better teammates. This is a massive area where players keep calling afterwards, and then they try to coach the player in the 1vx. Now, another thing about coaching players in 1vx like that is that there is no perfect, most efficient strategy to 1vx. That yes, if we had robots, I could design a system where you play 100% of the clock and you always play off the enemy this way and you make him have a bad peak and then you take a shot. That's great. But when we're talking about the factors of these individual players, sometimes people say, I've even heard commentators do this, like, why would he peak that? That's even I know that Silver 3, it's like, the reason why I picked that, mate, is because maybe he's bad at defensive shots. Maybe he's not good at holding a really close range angle and making the guy run on that corner, and that maybe even causes him more anxiety and he gets more. So instead, he tries to take a favourable shot for him sometimes. Now, on the most efficient level, yes, we'd ideally play out the smartest way. But for certain players, actually their chance to win the game might come from doing something different to what the most efficient, ideal way for the smart player would be. So that's another reason why you don't coach your teammate, because you're not going to tell him how you'd play the round. You're trying to help him win the round himself. And so most of the time, he's going to know that best himself. And you have to leave him to do it. And if you want to discuss it, this is where you take that round and you talk about it after the match when you all watch the demo back and you pause it. You say, here's the things you could have done. You don't tell them you must do this, but you say, did you think that you could have hid here a bit longer? If you'd have waited 5 seconds here, it wouldn't have mattered if he'd killed you. The bomb would have exploded. That's when after the match demo reviews and team discussions is going to fix everything and train you up so that you're all next time know what to do and know how to play more effectively. You're not in the moment trying to band-aid and coach people like this. This is a really, really bad sign. So a lot of this goes into the world of practice. Now, in practice, we're going to get to an area where there's so many fucking excuses I've had to deal with NA players over the years. I'm going to get into some of them. So first and foremost, practice should be two things: scheduled, regular. What I mean by that is regular, there should be a set amount of practices every week on certain days at certain times. So whatever the setup is, okay. Every weekday we practice from 6 till 9 and we always play one of these two opponents. Secondly, it has to be scheduled in order to make that work. As in, we've already planned 4 days in advance that we're going to play Cloud9 on a Friday at 8 till 10, and people are going to turn up to this. Now, if you don't turn up, and I've heard these stories again and again, like, oh, people don't turn up to practices. Well, ultimately, if there's even 2 or 3 teams a year that will turn up, then that's no longer a problem. The teams that don't turn up, fuck them, they're going to get nudged out. The problem here is, as far as I can tell, this goes to a lot of these excuses. People use the excuse of what someone does to them as a reason why they can do it to someone else. Like, oh, he doesn't turn up to my practice. Fuck it, I'm just not going to turn up if I'm busy then. Like, that doesn't work on any level. That just ruins the whole scene. So it has to be scheduled and regular. Because I know from watching like StarCraft and Korean League of Legends, etc., one of the areas the Koreans got really far ahead in is that they got into this world where they would schedule practices properly. Like on Monday, we know we're playing that team and we're going to play these number of games. So we're going to here's what we're going to do in those games. And on Tuesday, we'll go to this opponent. Now, part of why they were able to do that, by the way, is that they have proper head coaches. And it wouldn't be players talking to each other where this player hates this player and this one said some shit about this one. So this one's going to fuck him over and say, yeah, turn up at 8. And then they don't turn up till 9. None of that shit's happening because the two head coaches are the ones who arrange the practice. And they get together and they go, right, my team's pretty good at this. Your team's pretty good. It would be beneficial if we practice. Could we practice at 8 for 2 hours around this time? They set the time down, then they make the team come, the team arrives and they play the practice. And it's like a professional environment. There's none of this bullshit that's going on in NA of people not turning up and people not having properly scheduled practices or saying that, I was away that month. There has to be disciplinarians to make sure this shit doesn't happen without merit or without some good reason to warrant it, There's also the issue, and this is actually something this doesn't just work as an excuse for NA, which is that people play in a way that they themselves know isn't that good. It's not very efficient. It's not very productive in practice versus other teams in NA. So domestically when they practice. And when they do this, they think to themselves like, oh, well, it doesn't matter. It's only NA practice. And, it's just because we can't play against the top Europeans, so we can't get the top practice. The reason why this doesn't work as an excuse is because in League of Legends, where actually some NA teams have more money than the teams from Korea, for example, some of them, believe it or not, or some of these teams from Europe, etc. The reason why some of these NA teams are actually worse is that they also don't practice the proper way. I've heard stories of teams in League of Legends who, as soon if the very first 5 minutes of the game went super bad, they just quit the practice. They were like, right, remake the game. Like that would never happen in a real game. Well, it does happen in a real game. You have to practice these scenarios. You have to practice all sorts of scenarios and play them all out and learn as a team how to deal with these problems. And that's what it's all about: problem solving and learning what your solutions as a team that you're going to come up with are. Like, if I do this, what's my teammate going to do? Oh, now we've learned how we together would approach this problem. There was also the issue that if one of them was just totally dumpstering, then they would just play really stupid and flashy and try and humiliate the opponent. This is happening even at the highest level. So this is a mentality thing. It's not lacking European practice and lacking partners to practice against, and the fact that they're playing other NA players. So now let's go back into CSGO. People playing practices, first and foremost, and because they're playing in this loose, stupid manner, well, not stupid, just inefficient manner, that doesn't really work very well in proper tournaments, it means that they're training themselves to have bad habits. They're getting away with shit in domestic play because of skill or the opponent not knowing how to punish them that they would not get away with in a top tournament versus a top European team. So good examples, whenever they're in like a 1vx situation or 2vx situation with the bomb, they peak every time, peak early and often. Like, that's the worst approach. If you're going to peak, you have to even be calculated. It's like the thing I said about gambling and rotations. You can peak, that can be part of your style and your strengths, but you have to peak in a calculated manner, in a way that makes sense. Like, when I peak here, I peak to make it a 1v1 because I'm going to try and get this kill on its own here. So for example, it isn't always correct in a 1v2 to sit just on the bomb and make them waste maximum time and run towards you, because sometimes that means they'll come in a coordinated fashion, clear every spot, and then know where you are and come in, the two of them and kill you. So there's not always a perfect aspect there. So you can do peak Sarah, but instead, I mean, dude, look at some of the players on Elevate. Some of the players on teams like Elevate, they would just peak every single time in these scenarios. These guys just loved to peak. It's like they always thought they could take the aim duel, because maybe versus NA teams, maybe they can. Some of these players are good players, like Roka, Desi. These are skilled players in NA context. So maybe in NA they peak and they get that kill and they've just won the round already. So they don't have to think about all the rest of it. They don't have to go through all this boring shit of like draw him in and then hide around here and run around the bomb and then make him come here and take a harder fight with me and then flash this guy so I can go hide in another spot. Maybe they don't have to do any of that stuff. And so to them, this seems like the shortcut. Like, right, well, all I do is I just peek him here and kill him. Yeah, but that's the problem. That doesn't work necessarily when you're against Olaf Meister or Shocks. That guy wrecks you then if you peek out that way. And now, if you're in a 2vx, now your teammate's stuck alone 1v3 and you've just fucked the whole round up for him. Another factor here to mention here is it's not that Europeans are perfect, because actually, especially the Eastern European teams, I noticed that a number of these teams, like Navi's a great example, they don't play these scenarios very smart. They will super peak as well. They have the same sort of issues. The difference is that they have, some of them, we're talking about incredibly skilled players who that is their style and they're very confident at it. And so they can get away with it, but first of all, they don't get away with it as much against the top Scandinavian teams. That's why they're not as good as the top Scandinavian teams on average. These are one of the little aspects that makes an edge between them. And secondly, if you're in a team that has less skill, less experience, less good comms, less good setups, less good strategies, less time playing against Europeans, you need all your advantages. You can't give yourself maximum disadvantages and then hope to win against teams who have every advantage over you and more skill and more experience. You need to get all the advantages if you're an NA team in this sense. Like, there's a famous story where, the in-game leader of a team, I won't mention the names here, but this is from 1.6, so it probably doesn't matter anyway. The in-game leader of a very, very successful team was speaking to a very good, skilled player. And he said to this player, like, why do you peak in this particular situation? Like, in this particular situation, if you just hide, like, you've got a really high chance of winning the round. But if you peak, then your chances of dying, they go up, basically, losing the round. And that player said to him, like, yeah, but don't worry about that. Like, I'm really skilled. Like, I actually win that scenario, like, 90% of the time. And the in-game leader thought he was being kind of like flippant, like, yeah, 90% of the time. No, like, you get my point. Like, you maybe win like 60% of the time, 70% of the time, because you are really, really good. You have very skilled aim. But if you hid in that scenario, like this particular way, you'd win like 90% of the time. And the player was like, no, I win 90, like, I only like lose maybe 1 in 10 times. And the in-game leader, who's a very intelligent guy who watched a lot of demos, was like, well, now you're being ridiculous now. You're just forgetting the times you lose, because there's nobody wins 90% of the time like that. Like, to get realistic here, 60 to 70 is a very good percent. That's because we're one of the best players. And so you could see here by the fact that even at the top level, there's a disconnect between the intelligence of how in-game leaders play the game or view the game and star players, Well, the problem here is when you go over into NA, there aren't really many of those players who are the smart ones like that. And there's so many where, because domestically, maybe they are winning 70 to 80%. They think it's the right approach, but they take that to Europe and they're going to be like, oh, I just missed my shots, or I don't know how that guy just killed me that way. Just like insta-headshot me, man, it's bullshit. Well, that's what's going to happen then, because when you run the actual odds in Europe, you don't know this because you've been playing NA teams, but actually your odds to get that kill in Europe might be only like 40% if you peaked there, whereas maybe it was like 60 if you hid in this particular fashion. That's like an example of just metagame understanding and strategy, where a lot of the NA talent is behind in teams in general, but specific really skilled players in an NA context are just behind in this sense and don't play in that particular sense. There's also the aspect that when people play scrims in NA, I've heard this story so many times, and what's funny is CSGO players are going to think this is specific to them, like, yeah, it's just because I don't like this person and he doesn't like me and all that. No, this is an NA mentality mistake that goes back a decade before you guys ever came along. It was happening in 2002, in 2005, in 2008, every year, 2010, going onwards. It's always been the case that part of the reason why people won't play properly against each other in scrims, and essentially not only deny themselves proper practice, the right to be able to play their proper tactics and see how they would work, but also deny their opponent the right to have a proper game and a proper scrim, is because, first of all, they play to win scrims. Now, that is a terrible mentality. You don't play to win scrims. You play to execute your tactics and to practice certain things. It's called practice. It's not a real game. So you're not supposed to be playing to win the scrim. More than that, you're not playing to win the scrim as in to beat a specific opponent and be like, oh, I've won 10 maps off him. Well, what did you learn? What tactics have you got down as a result of that? What have you done as well? You don't get anything from winning them. I have a really bad cold right now. Even more so, because people play to win, they will abandon the strategies at times. Like, this guy's really got it going at this site, so he just keeps dicking them there, even though that's not part of the strategy and he's deviating from it. But it doesn't matter, I'm getting the kills, we're winning the rounds. Who cares? We won that scrim anyway, it was easy, doesn't matter. Well, that's not going to happen, is it, when you play against Fnatic? You're not going to wreck them that way. You're not going to deviate from the strategy, do your own thing, drop 30 every single time in 2 out of 3 maps in a best of 3 and win the best of 3. So you've just wasted your time in that practice, even though you could do that against this opponent on this game and dick him completely. But your game now, your prize now is what you got there. You got to dick him in that scrim. There we go. That's your prize. The prize that the person who plays properly and actually executes strategies and tries to learn about his team and the game gets is not in the scrim right there. Even though you do get a small satisfaction from learning things, etc., it's going to be, the big payoff is going to be when he then has real strats to play a proper opponent and real things that make sense, and he understands why these things work in the game and why other things don't, and how to adapt in the game, because he's seen this tactic break down like this and he knows what the adaptation would be. That's where the payoff's going to be. But what NA teams are doing that. Now, another thing people do as part of a corollary concept to try playing to win scrims is that they play to, because part of the reason why they want to win scrims is they can't stand to lose to this team and this player and this, and so they want to win the scrim over them. But again, that's not the aim. The aim isn't to beat this guy in a scrim now. Either beat him in a real tournament, so you want strategies and to know what he's going to do, or you want to beat better teams, international teams in a national tournament. A corollary concept of that is people want to humiliate others in scrims. If they're winning a scrim, they want to just fuck even the strats. Do whatever you want now. So if they have a really weak B, their B player's having a really off game, just ultra rush him, all 4 people. Some of us buy like fucking scouts and someone buys a Negev and we just totally humiliate them. That's, at that point, you are now wasting time. Unless both teams have agreed to have some fun and just goof off for a bit and let off a bit of steam in the game, you are now wasting everyone's time. And you might think, well, he's not even worth my time. Look at that. No, you're wasting his time now as well. You're not even giving him a chance on his off day to practice properly. You've now denied him the right to proper practice. That's one of the main things about these NA players. They not only fuck themselves, but they fuck everyone else in their own scene. They're the ones shitting in their own area. They're the ones who shit where they live. Like, it's like that stupid thing of like, there's a really funny statement a comedian once said, where he said, why would you beat your own wife? And the joke here, right, was not like, oh, domestic violence is wrong and stuff. He's like, that's your wife. That's like keying your own car. Like, it's just stupid at the end of the day. If you were really angry at something, you'd key someone else's car, right? No, you're going to key your own car. Like, oh, fucking... And now your own car's ruined. Like, that's the logic of these people dicking around and fucking up their own strategy practices and not playing properly, and then complaining when they get to the tournament, like, oh, I don't have proper strategy. You know, I don't get proper high-level practice against Europeans. Yeah, you don't get high-level practice, end of story. Never mind against Europeans. You don't provide high-level practice for your opponents, and you don't get it in return, and you don't attempt to play in a high-level manner in your own practice, whether or not it's high-level in terms of the actual level of the players, but you don't get high-quality practice because you don't provide it. That's a major thing about NA teams. Because there's also the aspect that goes into the humiliation and trying to win scrims of like trying to trash talk the opponents and stuff, which gets into the politics stuff that I'll go into later. But it also can be summarized in the idea of not being serious about your practice and saying, because this practice isn't good, I'm not going to take it seriously. And because they're not playing very well, I'm not going to take them seriously. I'm not going to take any of this seriously. But then I get to a real tournament where I need to play seriously and everything has to be serious. And now, unsurprisingly, I'm not trained for it because I spent my whole time training bad habits and not training good habits and not grinding out and error correcting and fact checking in terms of like what you should do in this scenario. Learning about what my teammate will do in that situation and a read for here and watching demos of the opponent and what we're going to do and preparing something specific. Because you haven't done any of these things, you get to you're the guy who never studies and thinks, oh, whatever, I'll do that whenever, and oh, this is easy anyway. And then you get to the exam, it's really hard, and you're like, oh it's rock hard, man. I didn't really get that much study in. Well, that's your own fault, isn't it? At that point, what do you want us to do, mate? Oh, then you just blame that you didn't have a super good tutor. Meanwhile, you didn't do everything yourself. So the problem with that whole argument of not practicing against Europeans, I've already kind of outlined it here, that you're not practicing anyway the way that Europeans would practice against each other. So you're not giving yourself a chance, and you're not building each other up, and you're not getting as much as you can out of your own practices. Therefore, yes, practicing against Europeans would be a short-term effect. You'd get slightly better practice immediately. But if anything, first of all, you're going to be shit practice for the Europeans, apparently. Or if not, if you can practice properly against Europeans, then why can't you practice properly against each other? So that's another aspect that this gets into. The whole not practicing against Europeans. I agree, the North American practice, because of some of the reasons I've outlined, and lack of skill, etc., isn't going to be as good. But one of the reasons why that excuse of, like, the reason we're not as good is we don't practice Europeans has never worked for me logically. It's because let's think about what you're saying there. So we're not as good, as in we could be good, we should be good, we actually are better than we seem right now. We're not as good because we only play each other, right? Stop there. Yes, what does that mean? You only play each other. Yeah, well, he's also not as good. So collectively, we're not good, both of us, but we should be really good. Because we only play each other, who both are not good, we're not good. Okay, yeah, continue on. Because we don't get to play against these Europeans. Pause. What do you mean by Europeans? Well, teams that are really good and they actually all play each other. Okay, and why are they really good? Because they all play each other and they're all really good. Okay, so they're all really good and they're all playing each other, yeah. So if we, who are not that good, got to play against them, then we would become good. It's like, sounds like you're admitting that you're all not good and that they're really good. Like, I don't understand the logic here. Surely low-level Europeans can say that who don't practice the top ones. Like, oh, well, we're actually better, but we don't get to play the top. It just doesn't logically check. Basically, it would be okay if you just said we are bad right now, and at the moment we don't have much chance of being good. But because we fuck up in all these ways, maybe if we practice Europeans, that would initially give us a little bit of an extra boost. Everyone could agree with that. But the problem here is you're in denial that you're bad right now. You think that you have everything and all of it, and that all it takes is you haven't had a scrim this week versus Fnatic or versus Na'Vi. That's not the reason why. There's all this systemic stuff I'm getting into in this video. But beyond that, like I say, it doesn't make sense. If this notion that you're already as good or you're already at 90%, but something's holding you back that you can't deal with, that's something that this whole video is kind of addressing, because there's so many things can be done right now, even in NA amongst these teams, that they're not doing, that fuck the rest of it. The rest of it, getting to practice Europeans, would be the cherry on top. That'd be the extra little bit that you put over the top. But you could get so far close to there before anyway, because think about this logically. If not being able to practice against Europeans means you can't have proper strats and they won't work and they won't be effective against Europeans, explain this to me. How did Keith Stars get so good at Mirage T-side? Remember when the Keith Stars turned up at MLGX Games Aspen and wrecked Cloud9 on T-side when they were playing T-side of Mirage with awesome strats, and then they went against Fnatic at ClutchCon, did the same thing there. We realised, wait a minute, it's not even like this is some team where they came out and, as you'd normally expect from an underdog, one player went crazy like Peter did against LDLC, or one guy had the game of his life. No, they did it with actual strats. These are replicatable strats that work again and again. They even work against European teams and NA teams that they're not ever getting to practice against. Maybe they'd been in NA a little bit in practice, but they haven't been over to Europe loads and practiced and all the rest of it. They didn't have that at all. But they obviously have practiced properly, and they've tried to design strategies and communicate properly and understand what's going on there. And as a result, they've managed to get an advantage even over the NA teams in this particular very specific area. Now, there's actually a history of that in Counter-Strike. Teams from Brazil, MIBR became the best in the world briefly. Istro from Korea used to literally have almost no one to practice against and just practice in empty servers, running strats properly and doing the proper timing of the flash. And yeah, they had the Korean discipline that they have culturally, but they would just drill this stuff over and over. And even against lesser opponents, they'd drill it properly and they'd hit this time. It doesn't matter if they could go there and just kill the guy with an AK. They'd throw the flash properly and then they'd try and come around as a two-man unit and take him out, check the right angles. and they'd watch the demos of the teams they couldn't play in Europe and try and figure out what would have happened if there'd been Zolik had been sat there at this spot who's very good at holding this one, or if Forrest had peeked out on us, how would we have checked that? They tried to play as if it was real, and they practiced properly, and therefore they got to a much higher level, almost at the level of the Europeans, without ever being able to practice the Europeans. And eventually, yes, they could go there, and eventually once upon a time they could go to LAN cafes and practice for like 1 week before the big tournament. But they weren't having it, but they were making the most of what they did have. And we saw this from a number of different regions that were separated and much more isolated than NA, and had much less money and opportunity and even less teams to play against. So NA's excuses at the time were the same, and they're the same now in CSGO, and they don't really check out. I've had to switch to the venue now, and so, I mean, I can't do anything about this flickering, but you can see me anyway, and I'm all dressed up, etc. So I'll continue my point, and I can't do anything about the echo either, so fuck it, whatever. A point when I was walking over that I thought I didn't make that well before in my kind of cold, addled brain was when I was trying to make that point about the teams complaining that they can't practice against Europeans. I don't think I was distinct enough on this particular aspect of it. When I said that thing of like, okay, so what are you saying there? Like, well, you know, like we're not good, but we could be really good. But the reason why we don't seem good is that we just practice against each other. Okay. So why aren't you good? Because we don't practice against Europeans. Okay, so what's the significance? Well, they're really good. Yeah, how is it that they're really good? Well, they practice each other who are also really good. Like what you're basically admitting there is that you are shit, have always been shit, and for some reason always would be shit unless you played Europeans. Yet Europeans are good. How? Like what? Like why are they good? Like essentially in that logic, they've just always been good somehow. How did they get good? Oh, they didn't need to be. They're always good. They play each other who are also good, and playing people who are good makes you good. Like no, there's a logical breakdown here which kind of betrays some of the problems with the NA scene, because obviously Europe wasn't just born being amazing at CS. It's not like they were just good instantly and then they played each other and got better. I mean, this is like a bootstrapping logic of like they're coming from nothing but making themselves good and making themselves better playing each other. No, they're good because they have a good practice scene and then players play properly, and yes, they have good teams now that are developed out of that practice, but that's the point. Yes, NA, if they want to, NA can sort of shortcut a lot of this process by taking teams and going to Europe and playing in Europe, living there for a few months, trying that style, but they could also, in lieu of that, unable, I mean, Americans might not know this phrase, but unable to kind of do that, why not start to do the same things the Europeans initially did? Build up a proper practice scene, play properly, and as teams get good, as Cloud9 gets good, as iBioPower got good in the past, you can then help your scene by practicing properly against other opponents and building them up. Because that's another issue I had with kind of Steel's points and some of Dazed points, is that in isolation, their points are great. They're making really good points that a strategy, ignoring who they are as people, are absolutely on the money. Their problem is there is a level of hypocrisy involved in it, or rather, it's like a do as I say but not as I do thing. Because here's the thing, I used to have these arguments with people from iBioPower and with people from Cloud9 in the past, where they would each tell me, oh yeah, you can't practice properly. See, if you play the others, then they don't turn up on time, or they dick around in practice, or they just do whatever they want. They themselves were the ones doing this though. Each of them would be telling this, and so I always was like, well, I mean, there's an obvious solution here, guys. If you both agree to play properly and regularly, then you can get proper practice. They were like, nah, fuck those guys, we're better than them anyway, and besides, they did this to me, and like both teams were doing it. Like Semphis, I mean, this has already been said publicly, he was quite famous for, if he stopped giving a fuck in scrims, he would just buy the Randy gun, a stupid weapon, and just rush up mid and try and get a stupid bullshit kill, something that he'd never do in a real game, and ruin the scrim essentially, and try to do it to tilt the opponents and fuck with them and all the rest of it. That's terrible. And yet Cloud9 was the team that supposedly were the ones that weren't a joke, and they were trying really hard to compete internationally. It didn't all add up. And then on the iBioPower side, so Steel and Dazed and all those guys, I mean, admittedly Steel wasn't in it for some of this period in time, they're the guys who, in practice, would just play this super loose POG style, and if they were wrecking people with aim, just keep wrecking them all day long. Just keep ripping them all the time and shitting on them and be like, haha, remember when I dropped 30 on those guys? You weren't practicing properly though. That's not the way you have to practice to compete nationally. That's why those first couple of majors, iBioPower ultra failed them. Because I remember the first one, DreamHack Winter, where they came, and in the boot camp, they were doing this run and gun style, just trying to get picks and wreck people and overrun a spot where you got to kill. And it was wrecking people in boot camp. They were owning even the top European teams. Then in the actual LAN itself, they were terrible. Their tactics were terrible. They had nothing they could execute on. None of it was working on any level whatsoever. So the problem here is these players themselves did this, and they didn't help contribute to the scene, because to them, they were big fish in a small pond, and it was going nowhere, and what do they care if these guys become good? And all they would do is put out the excuse of, like, of course we can't play against top Europeans like Fnatic and Na'Vi every week. And they never did anything to build their own scenes. Okay, now that some of these guys aren't involved in it, maybe they've got a bit more perspective. yeah, now they can look externally at other teams and see the flaws there and say, hey, this is stupid, guys, you should practice properly. So I get that. But that's why I feel like some of the message, even though it has been quite well received, some of the players, if I was a current pro player, I can see why some of them would be a bit pissed off. Like, well, why are you telling me this? Your team didn't do this, and your team didn't always play properly. And some of your teams peaked in stupid scenarios. Some of your players, it's not like they always did the smart thing and all this that you're kind of blaming me for now. So I get that. That's why I'm not trying to make this video like I'm the guy who knows everything and I'm shitting all this. This is just for an outsider when I'm not embroiled in it. Things that seem like obvious problems, and then I look at the European side where some of these problems, listen, some of them do exist. I'm not one of the guys who pretends that Europeans do everything right and never make mistakes. Because some of the European teams, great examples, Navi, Virtus.pro, some of these teams, NIP, have great flaws in adapting to the modern meta, or play things totally incorrectly, or do things really wrong, or have a player that's just off the wall and does things that don't make sense. JW is a good example. But either they integrate it within the team, or the other members of the team understand how to play around a player like that, or it's their style, or even more so, they have every other factor to make up for it. So in Navi's case, they have phenomenal aim, and they have a very distinct style, even though I don't think it's the most efficient, that like attack at 20 seconds, or we don't get the bomb down style. Okay, that doesn't work all around Guardian, but he's so phenomenal, he can get the picks. Like they find a way to make it work, but that's because you kind of acknowledge what your personnel skills are. So go beyond all of this practice stuff. I think a big issue, one thing that kind of blew my mind when I watched that Steel video when he was talking to Tariq, and was it Hayes who also got on there, and Moses, was this notion that these players don't watch demos. That blows my mind. First and foremost, everyone says this, and every team would tell you this is a good idea, but they don't do it. After scrims, after each scrim, there should be a little 10 to 15 minute segment where ideally, mainly the in-game leader tells you things like that you could have done differently, or ways that you didn't quite execute that, like, you know, the flashes were a bit off there, and you go over it that way. First of all, there should be that kind of like decompression element to the end of the scrim, or the end of the scrim session, if you're going to do a whole block of scrims. That should always be present, because that's an error correcting thing where we're trying to improve as a team and figure out how to get value out of what we've done now, and then get value out of what we're going to do again in the future. To give you an equivalent for people watching this, if you're a guy who plays matchmaking, or you play a game like League of Legends, okay, if you just play all the time, yes, over time you can improve and you can sort of fix things if you consciously try and play with purpose, but it will also help you if in between games you think about the key mistakes you made in the last game, or what you want to do differently next time, and have that in mind going into the next game. Or you watch a guide and you think, right, can I take 1 point away from this that I'm going to try in the next game? That kind of approach will make you improve a lot faster than even playing an extra game in that period of time that you took to watch the guide or think about it would, in that sense. So the thought aspect, the theory crafting, is very vital. And for teams, this is a very important concept. So there's that concept. Then there's demo watching. Like, there's 2 types of demo watching that these teams should be doing, because we're trying to get every advantage, remember, to make up for the advantages we don't have of being able to play the Europeans and have certain extra amazing players that some European people have. So first and foremost, we have to watch our own demos. That means when we have a match, especially these like major ones, etc., we have to go over the whole demo. I'd suggest doing it individually. Like, it'd be great if everyone in the team had a mentality of like, I'm going to watch my own match, see what I did, then watch what the team did. But in an ideal way, you'd be watching it as a team together on like this and talking about stuff. In an ultra ideal world, I would even suggest having people who play the same bomb site watch each other's POVs. I think it was Moses maybe suggested that. So that, like, for example, the player who's playing off this guy gets to see literally from his POV, like, oh, did he need something there? Could I have done something extra? Would a flash here have helped him when he looked there? That's going to actually help build up, in an artificial way, some of the seemingly natural, intuitive, incredible team play that some of the NIP players or Fnatic players have when they play those sites. It's like they're just miracles. Like, this guy's looking this way and the other guy's covering him and he flashes and he comes and helps him. Okay, maybe you don't have that now. Maybe you won't have the same natural level of that, of like, oh, from Crims who just somehow have that. But hey, maybe you can build up an artificial framework that comes an approximation of that, simulacrum of what that can be. It won't be as great, but it'll be better than what you have now. It won't just be this aspect of like, oh, why did you do that? Oh, I just missed my shot and stuff like that's not building anything. You're not solving problems when you do that. So there's that aspect. You've got to be doing that, and you must. This is an absolute must. You must be watching demos of your opponents. Now, when you watch them, I kind of made this point about anti-stratting earlier. Or maybe it was in another video. When you watch demos of your opponents, you're not looking for all the specific strats and writing them down and saying, right, they're always going to do this on this round, and when they do that, this guy will always be cat and look down. Yes, that stuff's nice to have in the back of your mind, like it could happen, extra information to draw a decision from in the game, but ideally, you're looking at tendencies. So for example, if they do a slow attack onto A, and it doesn't work, and that someone dies early at this point, Are they the team that pulls back and just regroups and waits a long time and tries to fake you out so that you might over-rotate, and then they're just going to then choose where to go and probe out, etc.? Are they the team where they'll very quickly try and just go to the other side and strike there? Are they the team where when they start out the round, they don't make a key decision early and they just want to test and probe and take aim duels places and then decide? You're looking for general tendencies. Essentially, what you're trying to do is what they do in the NBA with the scouting report. Like, this is roughly what they do. Here's the strengths when it works well for them. Here's when it doesn't work that well. Because then you can see when they're doing things that are working well for them, so you can adapt and do hard counters sometimes. And then when they're in situations where it's not that favourable, you can see, like, right, I've actually gotten them into a situation that's not that favourable. This is ideal for me. I want to be trying to do this. Like in the NBA, they'll literally have scouting reports for individual players in terms of defense. Like, okay, this is one of the best players, but you know what? If you make him go left and shoot, then he shoots about 45%. But if he goes right, then he's going to get past you to the basket and he's going to slam dunk. If you have that sort of basic knowledge, not extreme specific situations, but general tendencies, it would improve your ability to kind of consciously craft the game and make decisions yourself so much in terms of this sense. And so if you're a European trying to get ahead of some of these, North American trying to get ahead of some of the Europeans or get an edge on them, this will be an ideal way. So you must be watching demos. I mean, that thing where Tarek said that I think it was him who said that he talked to Fiflar, and Fiflar said Nip didn't used to watch demos. That just gave me brain cancer, man. First of all, maybe Nip didn't in the early days. First of all, Nip were the ones who defined the meta and how to play CSGO. They were the first to understand all the roles and have players that were effective in all the roles. And secondly, they played a super default style, which was very default, but based on abusing the strengths of their star players, like Forrest, like Freiburg with great entry fragger, like Get Right at the end. They had such strengths in every area that they could get away with the default style. And you know what? By the end of Faflan's career, they couldn't get away with it anymore. Other people were better at everything than them, and they had no one strength they could rely on. In fact, this was one of their major issues. They needed coaching. They needed people to change things up. They needed to change the way they played the game. They couldn't just do default stuff anymore. They had to change the maps they were good on. They're a perfect example of why you do need to watch demos, because the great teams, think about teams like Fnatic, Envious, they are watching demos. And even the lesser teams that can get upsets, teams like Titan, they're watching fucking tons of demos. The reason why Titan's so good against teams like Envious and Fnatic is because when they have prep time and they know they're going to face them, they go super in-depth, and Existence breaks down those demos and he figures out how we're going to play and what tendencies they're going to have, what can we exploit, what little edge can we get. And that's how he's able to get a team that's much worse on paper and thrash a team like Fnatic at ESCA, where that shouldn't even be possible. This is what these... Basically, here's a general principle for you to think about. When you see lesser European teams, so Na'Vi, Titan, you keep going down the list, go even further down, Flipside, Dignitas, look at the different strengths some of these teams have. They all have different strengths, okay? So like Titan and Flipside have quite good T-side tactics, quite innovative approach, quite good discipline. Dignitas have like some good team play. They have a couple of maps where they have a couple of strengths in terms of players. You look at a team like Na'Vi, they obviously have one of the best stoppers, they play entirely around him. They have other players where even if they have quite poor economic management, they do in the case of Na'Vi, they're able to get away with it by certain maps they just have a very special strength for, and then they have such a defined T-side style that it's like execute style. It either works and we win, or we can win, or it doesn't and we lose, and then we look at what went wrong. They're not just changing stuff and just going for picks and crazy stuff and playing free-for-all style. So all these teams, the key thing is, if you're a North American team, look at these teams who are the lesser European teams, who aren't as good as the Fnatic, Envious, Nip versus Pros of the world, TSM. Look at them and how they're able to still compete with these top teams and have games where they beat them even and win maps off them. Meanwhile, you guys aren't to the same degree. Look at what they're doing and how they adapt to their disadvantages. And if you can design a similar distinct style and have strengths of your own, and then if you can add in other aspects, you can bridge some of the gap and you can get close. Because it's not a good enough excuse to say just because you don't play Fnatic, that's why you can't beat Fnatic. That's a ludicrous opinion. I mean, people in Europe play fucking Fnatic and they're not beating Fnatic, are they? So you have to be realistic about this. Going beyond the demo watching shit, which people have to do, that's a must. But then again, here's the thing, I don't blame players entirely. I mean, listen, if you're a player who's really driven, you want to be the world champion, you should be doing this yourself. People like Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant particularly, he would obsessively watch game film. Peyton Manning, these guys watch every single play they did to figure out what they did wrong, and the opponent did to look for weaknesses. They're trying to get every advantage they can because they're driven personally to become champions. Whether their team can be good enough or what, they're going to do everything they can do. So that's on the star players of NA. But beyond that, my main person I put the responsibility on. So first of all, the in-game leader, he has to enforce this. Secondly, the owner, because the owner must want his team to have a proper approach like this and must enforce this and bring in the staff that can do this. And then thirdly, this is where you need coaches. This is where you need people who can take some of the load of this, but also distribute among players. Like, I need you to look at this, and in-game leader, like, here's some of the things that we should be thinking about for this scrim. He should be helping, a liaison, a guy who can help out in this particular sense between all the parties to elevate this and keep everyone on track. Because, okay, the players are trying to play, the in-game leader's trying to call the strats. This is where we need a proper framework. It's no excuse to say we don't have it. Get them now. Even if they're bad now, we're starting to go to a position where we're going to have good coaches one day and the bright people. Beyond that, there's a massive, massive problem in NA, which I'm going to get to now, which I kind of touched on before, which is the kind of most literal way to describe it would be to just say the politics of the scene. That would be how people would probably describe it in grandiose terms. But in reality, it's just personalities and interactions of people's relationships within the scene. That is one thing that holds NA back massively. There is so much trash talking that goes on in NA that it creates so much animosity between opposing teams that then this player doesn't want to join your team. And even if he's good, and on paper, if you were to look like a general manager and go, here's the skills he brings and here's what we need for our team, you'd go, right, it's a slam dunk. I should obviously bring him in. I should try him out, and maybe I could mold this young player into a good player. Instead, you go like, oh, that guy talked shit to me in the back of your mind. So you go like, nah, he plays randy. He's not good enough. Yeah, he's got aim, but he hasn't got any brain. He's too arrogant, like he wouldn't work with the team. You have all these reasons which really just come from your own feelings being hurt, or you just disliking that guy and having a personal relationship, which, by the way, could change if you just actually became teammates. And that causes you not to make the most of the scene you've got. The biggest problem NA has, I'll describe it like this, is that they still think of themselves as a continent. Think of North America as if it was one country. So let's just say USA for now, but let's say North America, Canada and USA as one country in CS terms. If there was one country, then it makes absolute sense as to why NA can't compete with Sweden, Denmark, Ukraine, because they're trying to make 6 teams be the best team. They've got all the talent split apart and people hate each other and don't want to play each other, won't practice properly. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, how many top teams do you have? You have 1, because half of the players are on Flipside, half of the players are on Navi, and so overall you have 1 team between the two, and then you have like 1 player over on Hellraisers. How many top players from Denmark? They have 1 elite team, TSM, and then they have Dignitas, who's actually around the level of some of the NA teams. Then you go to Sweden. Sweden's the only country that probably has 2 elite level teams. The only one in the whole world. So if you think of NA as a country, that's why you should be trying to build a super team or 2 super teams instead of having 6 teams with all the talent spread out and then wondering, oh, why can't we compete? Oh, it's because we don't play with Europeans and stuff. No, this is an illogical way to do it. But the reason why you can't have them all funneled in the top teams, and it isn't that before that the iBuyPower and Cloud9 just had all the talent. It isn't. It's that these relationships get in the way of it. Like these NA teams used to tell me all the time, oh, there's no talent out there. And then you look out there, and Shroud's out there, Nitro's out there, Desi's out there. All these players were out there. They just weren't in top teams. And because they never could get into top teams, because people disliked them because they said they were stupid or they're arrogant or they don't play properly and all this stuff. Stuff that, by the way, changes as you get a chance and you learn from veterans and you get moulded by proper in-game leaders. Because they weren't even willing to consider them, those players had to beat them or really prove it before they could even get a chance. And it's only now, years later, that these players have gotten a chance. And yet people complain and say those players were there all along. Well, if people like Shroud were there all along, people like Nitro were there all along, you guys weren't making use of them then. Meanwhile, you were sticking with some of these players like Adren, whoever else, fucking Nothing, Semphis. I mean, what's going on here, guys? So this politics gets way too far in the way of it. Both for people joining teams and here's the biggest problem, is for established teams not wanting to recruit talent who they should be getting. I mean, I feel like This is one of the major issues, because I can see so many times when there's a player here who I'm like, okay, listen, I know you don't get along with him, but he'd be good for your team, and they just would never accept or even consider doing it. And you see it now. Some of the changes made in this NA shuffle clearly weren't actually people addressing, here's a hole in our team, here's how we'll fill it with this part. It was like, oh, we're not comfortable with this player, so we're going to get rid of him, we're going to get this other guy that, yeah, he has some skill, but I think he'd be a better fit in our team. Okay, listen, the social aspect's great, but the social aspect should be the cherry on the top after you've made the fucking cake with the proper ingredients. If you don't address your problems as a team that you need, personnel-wise, then you're supposed to address them personnel-wise first, like making an NBA team, okay? Then you address the style and all that aspect and make sure it fits to what you do, all right? And beyond that, you need to on top of that, then start with the practice and the tactics and all that stuff. It's like there's a hierarchy to this, and if you can do it properly at the personnel level, then do it properly with the style for the personnel, then do it properly with the practice, then do it properly with the actual literal tactics you've got, then you're going to have this cake that you can then put, oh, we've got a good social aspect, and people work on top of that at the top. You don't start with that in the first place. Otherwise, you're going to have to eliminate players who'd be very good in your team just because right now they don't fit with you or they talk shit about you in the past. At the end of the day, there's two ways you can go with that, two ends of the spectrum. You can either have everyone that you like now and no one that talks shit to you and just be decent now and compete for the best in NA, or you can get these teams together where it's going to involve work and overcoming some differences, and you can go for the world title, because there's no way between the two. They've tried that. Cloud9 tried all that before. They tried having the team that always worked together as friends and all that, and overlooking people's problems because that guy fits socially better with us, and they never got to a major final ever in a European tournament. So we've done the politics aspect there. I mean, yeah, my main problem with that whole trash talking thing is it erodes team spirit, it spoils the scene. I mean, when you think of this NA shuffle, part of the other reason it came along, here's another thing about NA players that no one talks about, is that they just talk so much shit. They just fucking talk all the time. I've already said in comms how they just non-stop talking. It's like that in the scene. Like, think about when the NA shuffle was coming up. How did we all know about it before the moves happened? Because all these fucking big mouths had to talk all the time on their streams. Even people involved in the shuffle, hinting at which other team's going to make a move. Not theirs, but hinting at, oh, that team's going to make a move there. Of course, everyone knows he's probably going to go to that team. Why the fuck are you talking? Do you see publicly JW and all those European players talking like this? No, you never see that. Until the moves are done officially. Yes, some people behind the scenes know about it, but it doesn't come out publicly. That whole thing betrays like an attitude about the game, where they'll take even their own teammates for granted and sometimes trash talk their own teammates, and then that gets back to a teammate and now he's upset, but he has to keep playing in a team. It like erodes team spirit. It spoils the whole fucking scene. You're doing it just because you're salty about that guy and you dislike him. That just doesn't happen in the European scene, and as a result, if NIP want JW or all of them, they'll make an offer to him and get him in. They won't then, because he trash talked him years ago or something. Like, that doesn't happen to the same degree, but they're not going to be like, oh, we won't have him because even though he's really skilled, he's like brainless, and plus I hate that guy anyway. That just doesn't even it's not a factor to the same degree in the European scene. So this attitude aspect really holds the NA scene back, and people just need to shut the fuck up, basically, in that sense. Like, it's not doing anything good. It's one thing if you're just a streamer, but the guys who are involved in the teams, like, what are you fucking doing leaking other people's moves? Like, this just betrays the move. Doing it in itself is not that terrible, but it just betrays a mentality that's very immature and is not professional in any sense of actually wanting to like have proper team spirit in your team, have proper relationships with other teams, know that you might play with those players one day. All these sorts of things. Here's the thing, everyone just wants the scene to be great for themselves, so their team can be good and their team can be at the level of the Europeans and their team can compete, but it's like part of them. This is one of the horrible things about NA. Secretly wants them to do it, but the other NA teams not to. You're all going to have to do it as a scene. The European scene is very strong. It's not just Fnatic, it's not just NIP, it's not just Envious. The scene is very strong, and the connections between the teams are strong, and all these aspects are there where they're not doing these things to each other. So if NA is going to battle itself, it's like that old proverb, like a house divided against itself cannot stand. I think it's actually Psalms or something, but whatever. Now then, in terms of the things that the NA scenes lacks, let's go through it. So in terms of skill, I don't blame NA, because again, if you just think of it as one country, there is enough skill to make these two top teams or whatever and have enough skill to compete. Now listen, maybe some of them don't look like they're capable of being a Kenny S or an All-Fight. So first of all, that's because a lot of them don't play the most effective style, even for their skills. Therefore, someone like Nitro, who seems to have good aim, doesn't make the most of it, doesn't get the same impact frags as even someone like, let me think of an example. Let me think of it. Well, at the moment, I could pick someone like Maniac, and I think Maniac's significantly less skilled than Nitro, but he gets more impact frags for Titan right now than Nitro does playing a fragger role for Liquid. So there's a great example there. So I don't know if you have that many Kenny S level, you have like the Skaduro, Shroud, Hiko, etc. But there's still enough to make a really good team, a couple of good teams. So one of the problems is the skill. Yes, some of those players got banned, which reduced some of the skill, and that set you back a little bit now, but it's also too dispersed among the teams. It's not spread enough in terms of the right roles with the right skills. Not just having a lot of skill, like having good aimers, but having good players for the different spots. That's why when I made my super team, it was like the best clutcher, the best lurker, well, it's the same thing, best lurker, the best clutcher, the best passive player, the best AWPer, the best skilled player, like whatever my lineup was, best in-game leader, it was like that. So skills is an issue, but team play talents. Where are the team players in NA? There's a few team players that are decent, okay, they're not bad at it. But when I look at NA in general, I would define most NA players in the top 4 or 5 teams as this. If they're not an aim star player, they're a failed aim star player, as in they play that same style and peak all the time and try and take shots and try and carry and have the 25 frags and all the rest of it. But just because they're not actually as good as the stars, they're not a star and they're not an aim star. But as a result, they're not going the other way and developing this like defensive style or like team orientated style where you play off this opponent and you try off this teammate and try and contribute to the game by facilitating him being better and helping make him even more of a star and doing the things that are necessary, the dirty work. There's so few of those players. I mean, in the past we had a couple of them like TCK, I guess Sean Gers at times did that role, AZK sometimes. I mean, you have a couple of players, I guess you could say now in, like there's maybe like one in CLG who does it. The problem is you're really lacking these players in general, especially the ones who acknowledge that that's their role and really go for it. I've always said this point, okay, if Fifth Laren, great nip player who's the support player, I mean not great in the concept, but as a great support player, if he'd have been in NA, you'd have never heard of him because he'd be playing right now for someone like Elevate or Neolum or someone like, he'd never get into an iBuy Power Cloud because they go, oh, he's not skilled enough, or, you know, we prefer to stick with this player who's a bit better in this sense, who has more frags and stuff. A player who does a valuable job for your team would never get into that position. So that's one of the problems, lack of team players, and that's acknowledging that not everyone can be the aim star, and we need these other aspects. Beyond that, you think of like the players in that sense who play for the team. So in Europe we have like the Flower was the old example, Maniac now, Crims is obviously the ultimate one because he's not only a supportive player, plays the supportive aspects, but he dominates the game doing it, or at least he did past. Now he's just a very good player. He was literally the best player in the world doing supportive stuff. There's no one comparable to that in NA. Now then, try this thought experiment. Think of NA players who both have some skill but are also really smart. Try and think of one. I'll even let you include band players, okay? So if you include band players, maybe the first name that'll come to mind is Swag. Maybe you'll think, right, he's won so many 1vx situations, seems really smart. No, not really. If you talk to him, you quickly find out that this is a guy who has a great feel for the game. He plays a lot, he gets into the rhythm of the game, he has a good sense, maybe he can visualize where the enemy's going to be, and that's what allows him to make these great 1vx plays. He's not the smart guy who can like break down the strat and figure out, oh, and I knew that this would happen, therefore, and set up a whole flowchart and articulate and describe what's happening. Not smart in that sense. Okay, maybe the two that you'd come up with now would be Hiko and, let me think, you'll have Hiko, Dazed, Steel, and Adren. Those are probably the next 4 names. Adren has major issues getting those smarts into the game, and so I'd argue that he doesn't have the skill part as much. Steel, again, the skill part isn't there as much, and the problem he has is his way of directing his knowledge for the game, his brain for the game, it's a bit divisive. It kind of erodes something, unless someone has a very particular kind of a personality where they can take criticism, harsh criticism like that, they're probably just going to shut it out, and so he's not going to get through to them in the same ways again. Sometimes you have to be like, you have to know the people where you have to be a bit softer with and kind of persuade them or move them over to a point, as opposed to just bashing into them like this is wrong. So he's got an issue there and he can't play anymore. Dazed is banned, and also he was like the ultra example of the guy who was super hard, and I will say this, one of the problems Dazed had is that he was so bang on the points about other people, but sometimes I get the sense, I mean, this is what I've been told, that sometimes he could make a big mistake like that, and he wouldn't necessarily accept the responsibility himself. Like, yeah, I fucked that up completely and I did that wrong. And that's a big no-no. If you're going to be the disciplinarian leader, you must accept full responsibility when you fuck something up, because that's the baseline to show that, right, I hold myself to this standard, I hold you guys to this standard. It can't be like, oh, shut up, you did something wrong anyway, and you'd ignore when you did a problem. That's a huge no-no. So I don't know if that was just a flaw in personality or what, but that's an issue there. But no, I agree, he was smart and he did have the skills in game. His problem as well was, I don't know why when he does videos now, he always talks up his old teammates who were banned, because I never saw a lot of this intelligent play he's talking about in his other teammates. I saw it from him, saw it from Steel sometimes, I saw it occasionally from AZK, but when I looked at some of his other teammates, like I don't know why he kept bringing up Skadoodle as an example again when Shazam was doing all his mistakes. Because Skadoodle isn't some super smart player who always makes the right decisions. He would sometimes overpeak and do really weird moves and stay in the same spot every time. He would do these things that were like big no-nos that Days would go crazy about someone else on. Now, not to the degree Shazam would. Obviously, Skadoodle's a phenomenal player. But the reason why I'm making this point is But as a result, I even felt like dazed when he was in the game. He might have had the smarts, and he has a very good knowledge of the maps and what opponents will do and how to abuse mechanics. But I also felt like he went too far into that scrimmy, abusive style because of the personnel he had. That some of them couldn't have made smart decisions and weren't going to run proper strats always, and they had difficulties on T sides as a result. And they went to this uber scrimmy, like surprise, fucked up style where you had to play it a bunch to really know what you could do against it. Now, last one, Hiko. Okay, I'll give you credit. Hiko does have a bit of nous about him about the game. He seems to have it. But the point is that it's hard to even come up with 5 or more, especially out of the non-banned players. It's really difficult. Meanwhile, you go to Europe and you try and think of really smart players who are good, where you go like Crims. You can just go down the line. Exist. Well, he's not as good now, but you know what I mean? Has that in-game ability. You've got loads of the in-game leaders. Existers, Pronax, Keep Going, Happy. Who else is really good and smart? MBK. There's tons of players. Go over to Carrigan right now would be a great example. There are tons of players. In fact, almost every top team has at least 1 or 2 of these players. So this is an aspect. It's not that these players in NA are stupid, it's that they haven't developed that side of their brain and that side of their game. Basically, they haven't developed a brain to go along with the aim. They've got some of the aim concepts, but because they're over-peaking and they're playing too aggressive and they're doing stuff they get away with in NA, and they're not scouting the opponent, and they're not thinking how to play this opponent, and they're not using the map and the bomb, for example, against opponents, they're not adding in that extra amount. And so as a result, they're hindering and limiting their own skill set and how good they can be. So there's another one. Brains is one, skill is a problem, lack of team players. In-game leaders in general is a big problem in NA. They either have in-game leaders like Adren and Chonges who might have the strats, but they don't have the leadership, the emotional aspect to set people in line and demand things of people and hold people responsible, hold themselves responsible for making proper calls. They don't have that. Or they just flat out don't really have good in-game leaders. Some of those other guys and some of those other teams, man, either they really lack skill, it really holds the team back. You can probably think of some names there. Or they almost shouldn't even be an in-game leader. It's just that their team needs one. The guy's trying, but he's not really suited for the job. They need people who are dedicated to that. And they need, if you have enough skill elsewhere, that also allows you to have an in-game leader who has less skill, but really good knowledge of the game and really is going hard at that. As a general wrap-up, if I had to pick priority of what players should do in NA to get at a higher level, let's forget getting to the EU level, just get at a higher level and build a better scene for yourself. Priority number 1 would be to practice properly. That would be the ultimate thing. Design a proper practice system where you regularly, in a scheduled manner, play each other. You play properly. Sometimes that means you run a scrim where you're trying to do 2 different executes and you just alternate between them. And maybe you even tell the opponent, this is the general execute we're going to try. And the opponent's going, okay, they play their CT side against you, then they go onto T side, they get to practice some executes. And even though, they're going to know what you're going to do and shut it down. First of all, hopefully, if you're going to play properly, they're not going to be assholes and just literally be like, well, we know they come at ramp and 5 near ramp. That would never happen in a real game, most likely. They're going to play properly but know what you do and not make it even harder to run and see if you can really get it run. So you're going to properly do it like that. Or it's going to be a scenario where at least you get a chance to try out a few more things in general. So you're going to play properly like that. Beyond that, I would say number 1 thing is not get EU players. First priority after that would be to get EU coaches. Why not get some people who've been around the EU, seen how this works, how to structure it, how the players work, bring them over, have them share their knowledge, have them set up practices within the teams where they don't have a beef with any players, have them set up boot camps where you go to Europe and you properly get to play the European teams and you get to see what it's like to do that, and they tell you how to practice against them, not just what to do, but how you do it and why you do it and what makes sense about this. Then, as the final one at the bottom, yes, maybe even import some European players. Get a really skilled European player, put him in a team that has some team players and has some tactical approach, and see if you can make it work that way. That could be a band-aid approach. So in general, there's a lot of problems in the NAC. I've tried to go through them in a very many of those accounts. I've got a bit of a cold, so I probably didn't nail every point. Some of them might have been a bit long, but I think we've got the general points. And again, I'm not saying this like I could do all this and it would happen if I play, but these are obvious points, and these are things which you just contrast against the European scene. And either the teams that don't have these things in place are lower teams themselves, as they should be, which is like what the NA teams are, or the teams at the top don't have some of these glaring issues, or to the same degree, or they've managed to counterbalance them with strengths elsewhere. NA's problem is it's got weaknesses in almost every area. It's not maximizing its strength. It's not practicing the proper way. It hasn't got the proper hierarchy. It's not being serious. It's not trying hard to be here, and it's not willing to overcome petty local differences to become proper international top-level teams.